Hi, I'm Doug from Dynamic Computing, and welcome to episode 71 of 10-Minute Amiga Retrocast. Today, I'm not wearing my traditional black Amiga shirt, but I'm wearing my new 10-mark shirt that you can get on teespring.com/10mark. My son runs the business, and so he gets every cent of the profit from these shirts, and I don't get a thing, which I still think is unfair. So today I want to talk about a relatively new Amiga product from our friend Edu Arana, the UnAmiga board. Now, first, a little bit about Edu. He's a prolific hacker, we'll call him, that runs a really great website with all kinds of cool 8-bit and 16-bit accessories for our beautiful Amigas. Now, I'll link to his website down here, but I recommend you take a look because he has some really cool stuff on there. The UnAmiga project itself has been around for a decade or more, and it uses an FPGA core and a standalone little machine like this one right here that's now superimposed over my air conditioner that allows you to run an Amiga on this particular core. You can also run other cores like there's an Atari 800 XL core, Commodore 64, ColecoVision, NES, but this particular implementation that Edu has done right now is limited to the Amiga, but he will be expanding that to other cores soon. Now, Edu's board is quite different. Instead of just being the raw core that you see here, this is a Cyclone 5 core board. Instead of just being the raw core and then in a little box that fits in a plexiglass case, he's actually created it with some really cool headers on here that allow you to fit it right in an Amiga 500 case or in Stephen Jones' beautiful Checkmate 1500 case, which is how we're going to be installing it today. Let's take a closer look at the board. Of course, right here we have the Cyclone 5 core board. This is the actual FPGA board. You'll notice there is a power header here. We do not use that for anything. And we have some expansion capabilities here. Now here we have a little buzzer for the floppy drive. So when you access the virtual GoTech floppy on here, this little thing actually buzzes and sounds a little bit like a floppy drive. In order to match up with the Amiga 500 or the Checkmate case, which is the one right there, we have two actual DB9 connectors that work with mouse or joystick, just like you'd expect. We have two RCA connectors for audio, or you can use this little 3.5mm headphone jack type connector to hook it up to a speaker system. Now, this has a 14-bit DAC or digital audio converter for the audio that actually improves the Paula's emulated audio on here and actually sounds better than an actual Amiga, and we'll be listening to it soon enough. Now here we have a mouse and keyboard port that allows us to use your traditional PS2 style mouse and keyboard. Now it's going to be one or the other. Either you're going to want the mouse hooked up here or you're going to want the mouse hooked up here. Now the cool thing is you use a PS2 mouse on here, it frees up both of these DB9s for use with the joystick. So two-player games, you don't have to keep swapping out the mouse and the joysticks. Kind of cool. Now here, this is where a lot of the magic is stored. This is a standard SD card. It ships with a 16 gigabyte SD card. That's all pre-configured with the operating system, with the ROMs that you need, and a selection of games in WHD load format, which is great. Now I've upgraded to from a 16 gigabyte card up to a 64 gigabyte card, and it's pretty easy to do. You just copy the information. But it's important to note that this has to be formatted for FAT32. If you format it in Windows, it's going to try and format it in exFAT, which is not going to work. Has to be FAT32, and I'll link to a program that allows you to format those in FAT32 in the description. Here we have a standard VGA header, and obviously you're going to be hooking a monitor up to this little guy right on this VGA header. This will work in either 15 kilohertz or 31 kilohertz display modes. It works in both of them. It is not a flicker fixer, so if you hook this guy up, it is still going to flicker in interlaced mode, all right? Here we have the power switch. This is the actual physical switch that turns the power switch on and off. You can flip that to the right and it won't power up anymore. This, just press it and it powers up the machine. When you have this in a Checkmate case, you won't be using this power switch. You'll use the power switch on the front of the Checkmate case that I'll show you here in a minute, and instead put the latching power right here. So the cable runs from the case right to this header, and boom, that power switch now will turn this on and off. You get your power with a standard micro USB connector right here, which is great because you can just use a cell phone charger to power this. I have also hooked this straight up to my laptop, and it powers up just fine with the power from my laptop. If you want to use a traditional 5-volt 1 amp barrel connector, it does have a connector here for you to use a barrel connector too. There are really not many jumpers on this little guy. This is not a jumper header. This is again for the power switch. Here we have a digital to audio, or we have a video DAC right here, 24-bit video DAC. This is your traditional A500 keyboard connector. When these jumpers are on, it's expecting you to use the A500 keyboard right here. With these two jumpers off, it's expecting you to use the PS2 keyboard, which is right there. So make sure if you're using a PS2 keyboard, these jumpers are off. These little guys are headers for LEDs. This is your power light LED, this is your hard drive LED, and that's your floppy drive LED. And we'll be hooking those up, except the floppy drive, we won't be hooking up the LED for that right now. So what are we going to get with this little beauty? When we fit this into the Checkmate case from Stephen Jones, what are we actually going to get out of our machine? Now, first of all, this is a 68020 machine running at 25 megahertz. That's what it pretends to be. It has 2 megabytes of chip RAM and 20 megabytes of fast RAM on the board. That's how it emulates it. You can also switch that and make the processor a 68000 or a 6810 via software, and you can change the memory capacity. You can tell it has 512 chip RAM and nothing else if you want to, and most settings in between. So if you wanted to have 8 megabytes of fast RAM, no problem at all. It's a software setting that I'll show you. It emulates a hard drive, of course, using the little SD drive, and it emulates the floppy with a GoTech type philosophy on here. So you're able to load ADF files into here. It does not allow you to hook up a real floppy or a real GoTech. The board supports AGA graphics. So any AGA games are going to work on this. It will also emulate ECS or OCS. So if you have particular games that only will work with ECS or OCS, it's a little software change and suddenly this little guy is working like an ECS or OCS machine. So let's get inside the Checkmate case and see what we have to do. Remember, with the Checkmate, you've got to slide it down at an angle like this before you can get the case off. Now I'm going to keep my GoTech drive in here, and I'm going to keep my SCSI to SD in here. I've already taken out my Amiga 500, my power supply, and the Zorro 2 adapter so I can use the UnAmiga. But eventually I'll put it all back in here, and so I'm going to keep these in here. The UnAmiga board will fit in here very, very nicely. Get some of our cables out of the way, and it literally just lines up with all of our little holes here. There we go. You can see that the keyboard and mouse fit perfectly in there. The two RCA jacks, the 3.5 inch or 3.5 millimeter audio, PS2, everything comes out of the back of the case quite nicely, and actually leaves us a ton of room inside of here. I'm going to go ahead and screw this board down and then show you how we make our physical connections internally. Now here, installing it into the case, we run into our first little issue. We have one screw that fits in here. None of these other line up with any screw holes in the case. Okay, I mean, there's literally, and then once you get the RCA jacks through there, this board's not going anywhere So we have one screw right there, but look at that. She just doesn't line up with the little spacer underneath. And no matter how hard I try, she's not sliding over, and she's not going to connect to that little spacer there. That means with this particular board, I'm going to have to use some double-sided tape or something like that to hold it in place. It just doesn't fit. So let's get some of these headers put on here. First of all, we've got our keyboard header that we use for our Amiga 500 keyboard, and that's just going to slot right down in there. And remember, these two jumpers have to be on in order to use the Amiga 500 keyboard. Now we have our power connector. This is for our power switch. We're going to plug that right into there. That's perfect. Now for the power light and the hard drive light, I had to break out some extra cables I have, since the one that comes with the Checkmate case won't quite work with it. So just grab yourself some double-ended cables like this. You can pick those up just about at any electronics store, and you can use these. We're going to do yellow is going to be the power switch or power light. We'll put that on the first header, and then we're going to use blue as the reset. Let's see, it says reset switch, but this is actually for the hard drive light. I'm going to pop that on there, and we're not going to do anything with the floppy light since we're using an Amiga 500. It's not going to be able to have the floppy light go back to the keyboard. I did try using this that passes the floppy and the power light back to the keyboard and plugging it in, but it doesn't do anything. It doesn't light up the Amiga 500 keyboard at all. So around the back here, I'm just going to be using this for power. So I'll plug my power into there, and I'll be using the 3.5 millimeter jack for my audio, and I'll be using this for a mouse and that for a joystick, since I'm not going to be doing any two-player stuff right now. I'm going to go ahead and put the case back on, since we've actually got all the wiring done, and we're going to take a look at what she can do. So now we have the board all installed in our Checkmate 1500 case. It's actually really easy, except the screw hole won't line up, so I have to put a little sticky tape mount in there to keep the board in place, so when I plug things in and out, it doesn't move around. I'll talk to Edu around that though. Now here's where I need to be honest in my review. Well, I'm always honest in my reviews. The board came with the wrong resistors. There's 3 little tiny SMD resistors that hook up to the 24-bit DAC. They're supposed to be 75 ohm resistors. What I discovered when I hooked it up to my monitors is that the colors were so undersaturated, it was almost worthless to look at. It just looked like this pale, you could barely see any vibrancy in the colors at all, and that's not the Amiga at all. So I went through about 6 or 7 monitors, and I found one, this NEC multisync, that actually works properly. So I got in touch with Edu, we went over some things, and he determined by me looking at the board and giving him descriptions that the wrong resistors were installed when he built the board. They're not 75 ohm resistors, they're 75K resistors, which are like, what, 100 times too strong or something like that. And so they're just doing weird things with the video. Now, I'm not worried about that. He already offered to repair it for free, send it in and repair it for free, or send me the resistors, but they're pennies a piece, and it's not that hard to replace them, so I'm just going to do it myself. But I think on future boards, it would be a really good idea to plug them in and test them and make sure the right parts are installed before they're shipped 6,000 miles away. This is one of the things we have to deal with when we're buying parts from just a guy who's selling them online. Now, Edu's a fantastic guy, don't get me wrong there, but he's just a human being, and he doesn't have a big factory with quality control agents. It's just him ordering the parts and putting them together. Sometimes things go wrong. It happens. Now that we have that out of the way, let's go ahead on with a review. Now, like I mentioned, this little guy has comes with a 16 gigabyte SD card. I put a 64 gig in there and just copied the data over because I want to have multiple operating systems installed. When it boots, you see it comes up, it says Mini-Mig, it says it's running at 25 megahertz. Now, by default, it's going to boot up into Tiny Launcher, which is a real cool utility that you can use on your own Amiga that starts before Workbench loads and allows you to choose things like games, demos, mod files, things like that that you can play before Workbench ever loads. So that's kind of a neat addition. Now, if you want to, you can just boot right into Workbench here by hitting Escape. We'll do that in a couple minutes. Or you can build your own Workbench installation, which I'll also show you how to do, and use your own Workbench on here. This leads us to another little issue in that I can't seem to get this to work with any of my capture cards. I have a VGA to HDMI converter that I usually use on my VGA devices to hook up to my HDMI capture device. It usually works fine. It won't pick up a signal from here. So until I can figure out another way to get this VGA signal, we're just going to do some screen captures the old-fashioned way. You see, with Tiny Launcher, we can go back and forth. There's music, demos, games. Hit the joystick button, or you can use the keyboard, and it comes up with a cool list of games here. So for example, we all love Apidia. Let's go ahead and launch it. And now we get a chance to listen to the awesome audio. Admittedly, not the best speakers in the world, but they certainly do work. Let's take a look here. Yeah, we're going easy mode. I'm a big wimp. Kill the bugs. Murder the bugs. So take a look at the speed, the performance, the graphics quality, the audio quality. This is no different than running this on an Amiga 500 or an Amiga 1200 right here. Let's load up an AGA game here. Make sure AGA works properly. Chupa Chups, the world's best-selling lollipops. I bet you guys know what game this is. And we've got some graphical corruption. Yep, very obvious graphical corruption here. So Zool AGA came out with some corrupted graphics. Let's check out old Brian the Lion and let's see what that looks like. Audio sounds good so far. Yeah, not too shabby. I don't see any graphics corruption yet. There's our old pal Brian. The Steamy Jungle. And so far, I don't see any graphics corruption. Yep, graphics look pretty solid. My gameplay is horrible, as one would expect. Let's check out another AGA game just to make sure. Let's try some Zool 2 AGA and see if that handles AGA any better without going belly up on us with the graphics. That looks beautiful. Got to play Zulette here, or whatever her name is. Now here, I'm not seeing any of the graphics corruption. Yep, AGA graphics look fine here. It has an issue with Zool, and I found that on a couple of other games too. So we've determined it will play most games, but it honestly does have problems with a few. I've had a couple of games like Deflector that will not load at all. Then we saw Zool AGA with graphics corruption, but I'd say a good 80% of the games are fine on here. So now that we've played a little bit with games and demos, let's go ahead and boot into Workbench. And you can do that just by hitting Escape on the Tiny Launcher screen, and it's going to go ahead and launch Workbench for us. There we go. And you see it comes up with a nice Workbench screen, 640 by 256. This is in PAL mode. So how does this work its magic here? Well, it uses a pre-configured HDF file, which stands for a hard drive file. Now, there's some things we need to be aware of when we're using HDF files on the UnAmiga. Because the SD card has to be formatted with FAT32, we are physically limited to a 4 gigabyte partition. It literally can't be any bigger than that because FAT32 can't handle a single file size bigger than 4 gigs. Now, I've gone ahead and we can take a look here. Since this is Amiga OS 3.1, it's not nearly as pretty as Amiga OS 3.1.4 is. But we can see we can go in here and see the drive and change its boot priority, change its name, just like we could with any drive here. Now, we are supposed to be able to use a second hard drive in here by going into hitting the slash key on the numeric keypad, going into hard drive settings, and telling it to use a slave hard drive image. Like in this case, if I tell it to use my A500 image as a slave hard drive, it's supposed to view that as a second hard drive. The problem is, it doesn't seem to work. Every time I've tried it, putting on a slave image, it just doesn't function. I'm not sure why. So this little guy is supposed to be similar to an Amiga 1200 or more powerful than Amiga 1200. Let's go ahead and check sysinfo and see what she says. Now, you there in the back that are currently whining, sysinfo is not accurate. Just sit down. Sysinfo's fine. Now, it's coming up in a funky double PAL mode, which I'll explain in a little bit, but we can still see it. Let's go ahead and check the speed of the machine. It's claiming that it's an AGA Alice with 2 megs of RAM, AGA Lisa chip, 68020. It's saying 88 megahertz, but we know it's only 25 megahertz. Let's check our speed comparisons here. Compared to a regular A1200, we are about 3 times as fast. We've got 4,062 dry stones, 4.24 MIPS, and a chip speed versus A600 at 6.35. Not bad, really. Now, where performance is affected in a negative way is in hard drive performance. If you remember last week, we did a nice test with our Amiga 1200 with a couple of different hard drives in here, and we checked the speed of it using a program called Disk Speed. Now, I went ahead and used Disk Speed on the UnAmiga, and I was getting results about 1/2 or less than the standard speed of a hard drive in an Amiga 1200. So maybe 300 to 500 kilobytes per second, where the irregular Amiga 1200 would be getting 800 to 1.2 megabytes per second. So the access speed of the SD card is nothing to write home about on this little guy. Now, how do we access Amiga floppies on here with our emulated Gotek? We hit our slash key. We can choose our disk here. We'll hit enter there. We're going to choose, we'll pick the Workbench 3.1.4 disk for DF1 and storage disk for DF2. Now, you'll see that we have just got our Workbench disks here. This works fine also for ADF games. So if you choose an ADF game, which I'll do right now, we're going to choose Mike Richmond's Awesome Vegetables game, and we're going to reboot with that in the drive. And you see it boots up just perfectly with the vegetables program. And we'll go to my favorite mode, shopping, and we play our game just like we normally would. No graphics corruption, it just looks beautiful. And the audio is just absolutely perfect. Now we've seen how we can use our little menu to put in a floppy disk. We've also seen how we can use it to change our hard file here. Let's take a look at what else this can do. We can go in, change the CPU from a 68,000 to a 6810 or a 6820, switch between PAL and NTSC Amiga, and also change our chipsets. We can give it different amounts of memory here. There's chip memory, slow memory, and fast memory. We can change how much we use, and we can change which Kickstart ROM we're using right here. There we go. So we can choose like 3.1.4, Aeros ROM, or the Kickstart 1.3. Under video settings, we can change our video filters, which just change how things look here a little bit, smooth things out. Or you can turn on scan lines, which is a complete waste of time and energy because they look stupid. Now, we can also load and save configurations here. You can have up to 4 different configurations. This particular configuration is using Kickstart 3.1 and the built-in Workbench 3.1. If I want to load my personal Amiga 1200 installation, I can just choose to load it up. Now it'll reboot, and it should reboot as my Amiga 1200. Now you see it's actually booting totally differently because I've given it a different installation to boot from. And there she is, my Amiga 1200, just like I have on my desktop. Now I'll explain to you in a minute how we did this. What you do is you go into our menus, and we can choose which disk file we're going to boot from. In my case, I got Amiga 1200, Amiga 4000, and Amiga Wave, which is the one that's built in by default. I chose my Amiga 1200, and then I went in and I told it to use my Kickstart 3.1.4 right there. Then I told it save the configuration, and I told it to save it as configuration 1. And then I created the configuration for the default one with Kickstart 3.1 and the regular Amiga Wave file, and I saved that as number 2. Now I can switch between them. I could create number 3 as a Workbench 2.0 install and number 4 as a Workbench 1.3 install, and then just choose between them as I want to boot between them. Now I want to explain to you in a minute how you can create your own Workbench installation, but first I want to show you a couple of other cool things. If we go into screen modes here, you can use almost any screen mode that you can throw at the Amiga. So in this case, Super 72, 800 by 600, boom, we have an 800 by 600 Workbench screen. You want to go even crazier? You can go crazier. We're going to go with 1280 by 720 in 256 colors, since this is an AGA machine. No problem. Well, my monitor doesn't like it. My monitor doesn't like this resolution, but you see the Amiga boots up just fine in 1280 by 720. But this is where we run into some issues. You see, this is an interlaced screen here. This is a 640 by 400 interlaced, so we actually have the interlaced flicker. So why can't we just use our nice double NTSC or double PAL or our multi-scan modes? Multi-scan, it allows you to do 640 by 480 in rock solid 31 kilohertz. We're going to go ahead and use that. And absolutely 100% it comes up with a rock solid display that looks absolutely beautiful, but we have corruption on the mouse pointer, and I don't know why. This appears anytime I go into any actual 31 kilohertz display. Double NTSC, double PAL, multi-scan, we get mouse corruption, and that's mouse corruption on any mouse pointer. So even when it goes into the busy pointer, she's corrupted. It's not the end of the world. Hello, this is Doug from the future, and you just heard me talking about the graphics corruption on the mouse pointer when you go into multi-scan or double PAL or double NTSC modes. Well, I was having a chat with my good buddy Amigo Aaron from the Amigos podcast last night, and we were talking about the issue, and he was experimenting and found out that if you change the mouse pointer to high res mode, that problem goes away. So just do this. Go ahead and go into your preferences, and in here we'll hit up mouse preferences for pointer, and we'll switch that to high-res mouse pointer, and we'll save that. And when the screen comes back, your mouse pointer is in high resolution, but the graphical corruption goes away, as you can see here. So thank you so much, Amigo Aaron. I appreciate you figuring that out. Now just be aware that even though we've got our mouse pointer figured out here, all is not peaches and cream in the multi-scan world, because if we go to call up our UnAmiga menu, you see that in the corner up there, blinking on and off? That's where the UnAmiga menu goes. The only way to get back to the menu, if you want to do things like add a floppy or change your settings or restart the UnAmiga, is to switch back to one of our other modes like NTSC or PAL mode, and then it shows up in the middle of the screen. I'll talk to Edu and see if there's a way we can move that on-screen display over. But if you work in Workbench most of the time and you don't need to access that, it's a great way to get an absolutely gorgeous display. So we've had some fun with the video, we've had some fun with the games. Let's make sure that the audio really lives up to Paula's reputation. Let's open up a mod file here and see what we have. Modules Exotic. How about Jam Cracker Bronx? Never heard of it. Let's see what it sounds like. Not bad, really. Productivity software seems to work just fine. Like here we've got Final Writer. Get it launched, and we'll do one of the fun resolutions. Let's do Super 72 High Res Laced. So now we've got a nice 800 by 600 Final Writer screen. Keyboard is nice and responsive, although I can't read it because the font's too small, but it works great. Programs like DPaint work just fine too. Let's go ahead and open up a nice AGA screen here. We're going to do a PAL Ham Laced Plus. Yep, so this will be 256,000 color screen here, and let's see if we have any files we can open. And you see Ham images load just fine. Again, this is a 320 by 200 that I opened up on a 640 by 400, so it's a little small, but it absolutely does the job. Now, what would be cool on this is if we had an actual USB port so we could bring programs, files, things like that in right on like a USB flash drive. That would be wicked cool, but I don't know if this particular kind of equipment can even handle that. But it's a cool idea. So let's go into a little bit of detail about how we can get things loaded on our new UnAmiga and how we can create brand new installations of the operating system on our UnAmiga. Let's talk for a moment about how we can get things over to your UnAmiga drive. Now, I've put my UnAmiga SD card in my PC, and you can see it comes up with all of the important mini-mig. These are the configuration files here. These are some of the files that are important to allow it to boot. Here we've got our Kickstart ROM files. And in here, I've put in some of the Amiga OS 3.1.4 disks that I used to mount using the integrated GoTech-like feature to install Workbench. Here you've got your HDF files, the hard drive files. You notice all of them are 4 gigs in size because that's all that FAT32 will handle. Now from here, let's launch WinUAE. You're going to certainly want to launch it as the administrator. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to load up just a basic A1200 configuration. So I've just created it emulates a basic A1200 with 8 megabytes of RAM. Now you're going to want to go over here to CD and hard drives, and let me remove the ones that I have. You're going to add hard file, and you're going to browse to where your UnAmiga SD card is and grab the hard file that you want to transfer data to. So I've done this. I've grabbed the hard file. Now it's going to try and boot from that, and if you deselect bootable here, it seems to still try and boot from it. I usually put mine into IDE mode here. So if we just clicked start, it should boot to that hard file. But I also want to be able to drag things over to it. So what I do is I click on Add Directory. I've got some directories here in my Amiga Files folder. These are the workbenches for my various computers. This is my work folder. And you see you can drag and drop things from your PC right into this folder. And we're going to select that folder. And we're going to click OK. And now when we start, in theory, it should start a WinUAE session from my hard disk file and also show that work folder, so I can drag things into that work folder and then drag them over to my Amiga hard drive file. So there's my work folder. This is a whole bunch of gunk. What we can do is we can take files and just drag and drop them over to the hard disk file, whether they're programs, documents, videos, pictures, whatever you want to. Just drag and drop them right into your hard disk file. And then when you close out of the WinUAE session and go back to your Amiga, there they are. Let's also look at how we can create a new hard file that we can either use to create a bootable Workbench disk, or we could just use as, say, like a work partition for a secondary partition. Go ahead and launch your WinUAE, and we're going to click on Add Hard File. We're going to go down here to New Hard Disk Image File. We're going to tell it a 4,000 megabyte for a 4 gig file. Don't make it any bigger because it won't work on FAT32. Click on Create. It asks where you want to create it. Go ahead and create it on your SD card if you want to, or create it anywhere you want and drag it to your SD card later, or make a backup of it so you always have it backup copies in case something gets screwed up. Give it a name. In this case, we're going to call it Work, and we're going to click Save. It's going to work its magic, and in a couple minutes we will have a 4 gigabyte hard file that we can use on our UnAmiga as a secondary drive or a primary drive. So really, getting things loaded on the SD card can be really simple if you're working with ADF files. You just put them in your computer, copy the ADF files over into a folder. The little GoTech emulation on here will work just fine in opening those up. If you want to get things into your actual Workbench installation on there, a little bit more complicated because you have to use WinUAE and mount it like I just showed you, but it absolutely works. Could it be simpler if we had a USB that would just plug right in? And yeah, of course, but we don't, so that's okay. Now, the UnAmiga can be used to boot other operating systems, like I mentioned briefly at the beginning of the video. It supports ColecoVision, NES, Atari 800 XL, and a few others. This variety of the UnAmiga currently does not support that, but Edu Arana said that he's working on a little memory card that's going to plug into it that will open up other operating systems, and you'll be able to run it Spectrum Next OS on here, which will be really cool because we'll be able to do some nice Spectrum Next stuff on here. And also he's going to work on the Commodore 64 core, which also would be cool. You can boot up a nice C64, why not? So what's my opinion of the UnAmiga header for the A500 from Edu Arana? Well, it depends on what your needs are. We have to understand that this is a pretty darn good implementation of an Amiga 1200 for $150. Now, you can't go out and buy an Amiga 1200 for a penny less than $350 unless you find some poor guy who doesn't know what he's doing. But most of them are $350 to $450 now. So that's a pretty good deal. Since a majority of Amiga fans are in this for the games and not for the productivity and creativity stuff like me, this is a great solution. It plays games fine. 80% of the ones that come with it seem to run fine. 20% seem to have an issue. You can add more games either via WHD load or as ADF files. You just have to put the right Kickstart ROM in here. Easy to do. Works great for gaming. The ability to have two joysticks inserted and a mouse at the same time, that's a cool little option. But just remember, this has a VGA interface, so whatever you play it on needs either VGA or you need some way to convert it to HDMI, and I had issues converting this signal to HDMI. How about for productivity and creativity, the kind of stuff I'm into? Well, it's no Vampire, nor is it advertised or priced as a Vampire. It's $150. Now, if they could get it to instead emulate a 68030 at 40 megahertz and give you an option for 32, 64, or 128 megabytes of RAM, this would be one wicked little system right here. If they worked out the little quirks where we have corrupted graphics in double NTSC, double PAL, and multi-scan mode, this would be a beautiful little option for doing some serious work on. So am I happy with my purchase of the UnAmiga from Edu Arana? Absolutely. I don't think I'm going to keep this in my Checkmate case. I'm going to put my Amiga 500 back in here because I have some plans for that. I'm going to either get a Vampire for it or one of those cards that must not be named, or I'll be attacked by Fake 5. I don't think I'll be using it as a productivity machine. I have plenty of other machines that are more powerful to do that on. But for playing games, put it in my extra Amiga 500 case, throw that out in the living room on the TV, pop it up to play some awesome games. I think it's going to be a perfect solution for that. The price is great. Now, we early adopters got them for $125 for the first 30 or 40 of them that shipped. The next generation is going to be $150 because Edu actually needs to make a little money on that, and I'm all for making money. I think it's absolutely worth $150. Surely you could get a Raspberry Pi and put an Amiga, the Amy Ben core in there on a Raspberry Pi, and it would be a little bit less expensive, but it would not so neatly fit in an Amiga 500 case. You wouldn't have your DB9 ports, you wouldn't have all your great connectors, so this is a fantastic solution. If we can just get a few of these little quirks that I've mentioned worked out, and maybe put on some kind of USB port to make it 1,000 times easier to get files into the computer, this would be absolutely perfect. The way it is now, where you have to pop out the SD card and fight with it in WinUAE to get your HDF file to mount to load new games into WHD load, it's not the easiest thing in the world. It's also not impossible, it's just not the easiest. It'd be so great if we could just put a flash drive in there and just copy stuff over. I would like to thank my wonderful Patreons, you can join me on Patreon for as little as $2 a month at the link below here. And to celebrate them, I like to show off their names in a creative way every month. So I'll be showing you a list of their names, and you'll be able to listen along with it with a beautiful tune written for me by my good friend MadPete, or Pete Morgan. And you'll understand why he's called MadPete after listening to this.
Hi, my name is Doug from Dynamic Computing. Hi, my name is My name is Doug from Dynamic Computing. Hi, my name is Doug from Dynamic Computing. Hi, my name is My name is Doug from Dynamic Computing. Hi kids, do you like Amiga? Want to use a real computer and throw away all your Sega? Want to copy floppy disks with Xcopy? It takes ages. Tried Sid, Paul is where my life is. My Amiga's great. I'm trying to get my head straight, but I can't figure out which ST is next in line to humiliate. And MadPete said, Doug, your 4000's a little beauty. Yeah, and she's recapped too. It's my duty. This 812, my Amiga had the hi-fi, cause I love the sound that I get from that little guy. PC was okay. Atari couldn't match us. When it came to the bomb, it was Paula Denise and Agnes. 2020 Little Guy Remix. What a little beauty. MadPete and Tenmark. Straight out of Douglas Compton.
Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. I'd love to hear from you guys. And I absolutely can't wait to hear from the hundreds of people who are going to come in and say, why don't you just emulate? Why don't you just buy a Raspberry Pi? Why don't you just buy a Vampire? Why don't you just please fill my comment section with all of these comments. I love them. But until next time, this is Doug from 10 Minute Amiga Retrocast, signing out.